All right, good afternoon and good morning to some people who are in this part of the world as well. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us at panel number 9 of the Global Game Changers Summit. It's so exciting that we are now reaching almost 15, 16 hours of this 48-hour summit that we're running. And very, very glad to have all of you guys here today as well. So, first of all, hi everyone. Hi Violet. Hi Nassma. Hi Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us here today. These are three very, very amazing panelists, and we're going to be talking about movies, which is the best thing to talk about at any point of time, at any point of the day. So, thank you so much for joining us, guys. How are you guys today?
Great. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I know our MCs gave a brief introduction about you guys, and and I've been communicating with you guys as well. But let's do a quick introduction. Please do share a little bit about yourself, and what roles do you play, what do you do, are you a director, are you a producer, and we can start off with introductions first. So let's start off with Violet.
Sure. My name is Violet Dufin. I'm a documentary filmmaker, producer, and director. I have produced, directed, and executive produced about 13 films, and most of those films are all about China. And I started my career as a journalist, and came to the US for graduate school and stayed on making films. And so we can talk more about it. But yeah, as mentioned that I started switching my career from producing more to directing, and in 2019. So I've directed 3 films so far, and it's been a fun journey, and will continue to be a fun journey to be a filmmaker.
All right, awesome. Okay.
So I'll go next. Hard to follow an Emmy award-winning director over there in Violet, but so yeah, my name's Stephen Hoffner. I've been a professional filmmaker for about 20 years in the documentary space mostly, as well as some scripted. I just finished my first documentary feature that world premiered at Doc NYC just last year, called Brothers on Ice. And yeah, I've actually got into the education space as well. So as my intro may have mentioned, I run the online video production program for the Toronto Film School, and I recently just got bumped up to run the on-campus film production marquee program at the Toronto Film School downtown campus. So lots going on in my life. My wife is always angry at me because I'm always working, but I love making films. It's wonderful teaching, and it's wonderful being part of this kind of crazy business.
Awesome.
Right. So, hi everyone. My name is Nassma Bahrani. I'm actually based out of the Middle East at the moment, but originally was based in Canada. And my career was slightly different, whereas I was more of a traditional, I was trained more in traditional animation. And then I sort of transitioned from kids content, and started writing a lot of different stories, whether it was for film and television, or whether it was for kind of the YouTube space. And yeah, and I've worked for companies like Warner Brothers and Disney at the moment. So it's it's been a journey, but I'm mainly a writer. So yeah.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so much, guys. And now thinking about it, I should have done my introduction first. So for those of you who are watching, I'm Sanat. I'm one of the co-founders and the Chief Operations Officer of Ascendance. Ascendance is the organizer of the Global Game Changers Summit. We are a platform that is focused on bringing the right resources to students for them to see what are the things that they are passionate about and how they can start at a very young age. I also make documentaries as well. I'm the director of Wanted Shades of Life. We've done 3 films so far, and our recent film was about an ex-convict in Malaysia who became the Southeast Asian Games bronze medalist in chess, that went on to win many awards in different countries as well. And it's very exciting to be speaking to all of you guys about film and so on as well. So let's talk a little bit about that. I know it's a very generic question to start with, but I feel like it's a good space for us to start about. But how did this filmmaking journey start for you? Was it one day when you saw this big problem that was happening and you're like, I have to talk about it? Or was it, you just sat down and you saw something, or you saw a brilliant movie and you're like, hey, this is amazing. How did this filmmaking journey start for each and every single one of you?
Well, I guess I can go first. My journey started, or my need to be in show business started probably watching Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. That was my movie as a little kid. Jim Carrey made me want to be in the film business. And I actually started in front of the camera and for, I guess, many years as a teenager. And I had some success as a stand-up comic, actually, and as an actor. But I guess to answer the question about being a filmmaker, I guess I came to a point when I was 19 and I realized that it was so tough being talent because you have to wait on someone to call you for an opportunity. And I wanted to be the person making the call. And obviously, as a producer or director, you have more control over your projects. And I guess over the next 3-4 years of my university career, I just shot and edited and produced and learned the whole 360 of production and teaching myself the trade because I wanted to be a filmmaker. And that landed me my first job at the National Hockey League as a video editor, which of all things I never would have thought, but as a dream job in Canada, it was really cool to start that way. And that was the beginning of my journey.
Awesome.
I can go next. So I started as a journalist, as I mentioned, and I was in China working for this major television stations in China, and also started fixing for a lot of projects for that's made by international filmmakers that's coming to tell stories about China. And I start to feel problems about that from a very young age of knowing of how the role of being in the news to reinforce the existing kind of major narrative about a certain race, country, and cultural can be problematic. And because a lot of the times that the story and the lens that they tell about China is not something that I grew up with. So, and then like fast forwarding that I came to the US actually for graduate school, and I start to see the other side of the story of how we also see that in the major media of how the major narrative is being, kind of like create a different side of China for the audience here. And also I don't want to counter that. So like that started the journey for me to really think about my place of making story and telling stories and what I wanted to do. So my main thing is I wanted to challenge whatever is in the mainstream media that's actually the mainstream narrative that's not true. So that became my journey. But I was kind of discouraged because I chose to make films when I came to the US, and then my professor at the graduate school actually kind of just not threatened us, like intimidated us by saying that this is actually a business that you're not going to survive. Like, oh shoot, am I in the right place? But I started making my first film, which was called Nanking. I co-produced it, and it's a film about China during the Second World War and how a group of missionaries decided to stay on in the city before it was being the genocide happened when the Japanese came. And so we follow the story, but it was made by two white filmmakers about China. So the film got really successful, and I learned so much, and it was it's sort of like my great starting point of my career. But I started to realize that my filmmakers back home would not have the same kind of resources and connections to make the film as big as it was. So I decided at that point that I want to go back to China and help the filmmakers back home. And that was also the time I started to see how, the first time I was, kind of connected with industry in China, how patriarchal it was. One of the events that when I first moved back was there was this panel where 4 established male filmmakers were on the stage, and one of the female audience was asking how come there's no female filmmakers on the stage. And their answer is, first they start with a laugh, and secondly they said women just have to work harder to get out here. And I got so pissed at it. So from that moment on, I decided to only produce film for first-time female filmmakers from China. So that started my whole journey of I think up till now I've produced for 7 films that's only directed by female filmmakers, first-time filmmakers from China.
So for me, actually, I'm going to keep going back to my background in animation, but basically it was a family activity, Saturday mornings or, just over the weekend, I would bond a lot with my father and the rest of my family, watching a lot of cartoons like Hanna-Barbera, Warner Brothers, etc. And so for me, that really started that passion for storytelling in general. And as I sort of grew up in the creative field and knowing that that's what I wanted to do later on in life, that's where I delved into writing. And I started writing a lot of scripts without knowing that they were scripts, really. And eventually, when I got into the field of interactive multimedia and design, not knowing that there was an option actually to become a full-time storyteller, and having come from a sort of an immigrant background, there wasn't really that much understanding, let's say, or education about what it is to really, make a living out of being a creative.
Yep.
So having gone sort of in a more I guess in a more flexible route, I would say, with interactive multimedia and design, I started getting into game development. I explored a lot of different formats of how to really tell a story. And that was very eye-opening for me. And then that's when I eventually sort of got back into traditional animation and started developing a lot of things. But I think at that stage, when I was in university, is when it really hit me that I really needed to be back in the Middle East and doing content that resonates with me, with people that, that represent me and look like me and can tell a lot of stories that, I would relate to. And I wished, as a younger kid that I had that growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really my motivation for also going back, similar to what Violet sort of said. But yeah, that was my motivation for coming back to the Middle East and really trying to represent that voice, because it is a younger industry where we're at, and the region is very much eager for a lot of content. I was very lucky to have worked on, produced, and developed a show at one point which had garnered around 50 million views, and it was in sort of it was in the local language, but it garnered around 50 million views on YouTube, and that just proved to me that there's a thirst and a hunger for this kind of content in our region. And that's kind of what I'm keep working towards, really trying to educate a lot of people about the importance of kids content, whether it's kids content or adult content that resonates with the region and tells a rich history and lots of stories. And there's so much talent in the region that unfortunately doesn't get represented as often as it should. But yeah, that's what I'm aiming for.
Awesome, amazing. Just hearing all of your stories, it's very nice to see how two things. One is the things about our childhood that influences us a lot. The kind of movies, the kind of shows, things that inspired us when we were very young. And another one comes back to a very deep sense of community, and speaking to the people that you want to speak to, or your audiences in that sense. So I thought we can talk a little bit about that, because I feel like that's a good place for us to head into. I've been very, very new, and I've been learning a lot of new things. And one of the main reasons why I wanted to make videos and why I wanted to share stories is because of the work that I was doing here in Ascendance, which is with kids, with students. We're going out there to schools, we're going out there and meeting people, and that's where you see, hey, there's a need for content like this. And very similarly, all three of you have that thing. Steven's from Canada, Nassma from the Middle East, and by that, you're from China. And we always talk about speaking about our communities, telling stories about people that people that look like us, that feel like us. But is it important for us to have other perspectives? Is it important for us to learn how other communities are functioning, and will that help us to tell our stories better? What are your thoughts on that?
So Kumar, can you just sort of rephrase that? You're asking if understanding our community makes us understand how to tell other people's community better. Sorry, I wasn't sure.
Okay, so how it's like you have stories from your communities,
Mhm.
but when you go and and all of you have worked in different countries, all of you have worked in different industries, and you've seen things there, you've learned things there. Does that help you bring a new perspective to telling stories from your communities? What do you think?
Yeah, I think anytime, your life experience is always going to shape how you end up telling a story in one way or another. It's going to affect you. I think, though, you have a responsibility to, if you are going to walk into another region or another community, to do the work, right? I mean, so the film that I shot in Washington D.C., Brothers on Ice, you know, it was about an African American community. You know, I'm a white dude from Toronto, Canada. You know, obviously I have a background in hockey, but you know, to have any sort of authority over any story, I think you have to, first of all, you have to do your research. You have to understand where you sort of fit in that narrative. Maybe it isn't best that you tell that story in some cases, but if you are that person, I think you owe the community and the history of that region enough respect to embed yourself with the people in those communities. I can honestly say that Washington D.C., Southeast, Northeast, those families there are like family to me now, and likewise, you know, like we became, you know, much closer than I would ever imagine. But if I didn't try to embed myself with them and didn't try to really understand their stories, that never would have happened. And then that's where you get into stereotypes. That's where you get into you know, problems, as Violet mentioned, with other people telling stories about your community, which at times can be certainly problematic.
Yeah.
I think that it's actually, there are two folds of your question. One is that I do think that it is kind of important that, because, you know, I've lived in other countries, and then understanding how to make that connections of the story I want to tell to a wider audience, to communities outside of my my country particularly, and the understanding of two things. One is the uniqueness of the story, the other is the universality of the story. And the uniqueness is what I'm saying is because of, you know, my upbringing and because of my way of looking at the world, that I wanted to provide some kind of like a fresh perspective that counter the main narrative of what is being perceived of my community and my country. And the universality, of course, is finding the right entry point into my story that can connect to people outside of my community. And to me, a lot of time, the universality is to be able to dig deep into that story, onto a humanity level, and onto a level that's deeply emotional, that can connect to everybody. I firmly believe that when we are on a level of deep emotions, that we can connect to everybody, because internally we all share the same kind of humanity, that we can talk to each other. And it's our job, actually, you know, like, even though I am from China, I don't take it for granted that I am entitled to tell Chinese stories. But it is our job to find a connection and build a bridge to make people outside of our community to be interested and to understand the people outside of their community on the transformative journey through filmmaking. So I think that's very much our responsibility as storytellers and as filmmakers. The other thing I also wanted to mention, there's a lot of conversations in our industry saying that the authorship of who you are means so much about what kind of story you can tell. And I don't think that we should be limited of who we are to tell about stories of our own community, because I think the most important thing as a storyteller is to build our own creative voice. And that creative voice, it shouldn't be limited to only just tell our own stories of our community, but the lens that we build from understanding deeply of the context, the deep understanding of why we're telling this story, who we're telling, and why we're telling it now, can be so beneficial for us to turn that lens onto other communities, as long as I think we operate it with the values that we grow with the Korea, and the value that we grow as a storytellers. To me, it's the most fundamental thing is to have the kind of integrity that I hold as a human being, the kind of integrity that I hold as a storyteller, particularly as a documentary filmmaker, and also the kind of compassion we have for people that's outside of our community, and the curiosity we have. I think that I'm just, you know, like brushing through this very superficial words, you know, but it actually really matters of the kind of values that we hold in order for us to be able to tell stories outside of our community. But I do think that it is important for us to hold that kind of creative voice, that we embrace ourselves, but be able to, you know, tell stories of, you know, like whatever story we want to tell.
Yeah, I think to add to what Stephen and Violet mentioned, I think the human story does really, as you said, Violet, does really kind of fall, it comes down to that, I think. From my personal perspective, one of the things that I struggled with a lot is my Western versus Eastern sensibilities when it comes to storytelling. And that's because I grew up equally in both parts of the world. And I myself tell a lot of my stories in English, for instance, but when it comes to telling the stories of my community in English, that becomes an added layer of complication, I guess, because I think a lot of people would be like, well, why aren't you saying the story in your own local language, or, you know, adding that flavor to it, I guess. And I think that's been sort of a journey in of itself, of having to tell people why it's important for me, you know, to blend that Western and Eastern sort of flavor, I guess, together. And one thing that I've also noticed is that for me, a lot of people have this understanding that, oh, you're from the Middle East. Okay, so you all must kind of think the same, or you all must believe the same thing, or, you know, have that same dialect even. And that's definitely not true. You know, there's 20 plus countries in the Middle East that speak Arabic, and they all have different dialects. You've got North African cultures, you've got the Gulf cultures, you've got the Levant cultures. And so there's so many different cultures within that one region that it's almost impossible for me to be able to say, oh, this story resonates only with this part of the world, or sorry, part of the region, or vice versa, right? So you know, the show that I mentioned to you that had that I'd produced at the time, for instance, was done in the local dialect. But it was done in such a way that I think it falls back to, it was an animated kids show, and it was done in such a way that it resonated with kids all around the region. And it was, while it was in Arabic and it was a local dialect, it still was understood as content that all kids in the region would relate to and would want to be a part of. And I think that was a very interesting, I guess, challenge for us to try and get it to work for everybody. And even, you know, even when it was shared with our Western counterparts, etc., they would still relate to it. And I think it goes back to that human story and how important it is to tell that. But yeah, so I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much for, you know, all of your very, very unique perspectives on it. But, you know, and I love that thing. It's the familiarity that we all share. You know, the stories that we tell. At the end of the day, it comes back to those few lessons that everyone can resonate to in different parts of the world. And I loved what Byron said about the universality of things, where at any point of time, any story can resonate to anyone. If you know, touch on those right points and those right emotions. And I also love the fact that, you know, all of you have tried to, I mean, you all have you know, worked in different communities. You guys have worked in different countries. You've seen the struggles. You've seen what they go through, and it's that amount of respect you have for that. It's the amount of you know, research that goes into it, and making sure that, you know, if you are tasked with telling a story, you are responsible for that story. And I think that speaks a lot, especially for documentary and even for animation and films and so on. Whatever you share has an impact to the world and to the audiences that you speak to as well. But let's talk a little bit about personal impact. And I think this is something that's very interesting for me, because I believe that every film that, you know, you make, as much as it has an impact on the audiences, it does something to you. You know, you grow as a person, you change as an individual. You know, your core beliefs, they change. So, you know, maybe you can share with us one film that you've made or one project that you've worked on, and how it has shaped you, how it has impacted you to a better person. And I think this we'll have a really fun conversation talking about this thing. So yeah.
I can start. I think that there are a few moments in my career life that really touch deeply to shape how I see myself growing as a storyteller. So, I mean, documentary is a very niche thing still today, and we have a niche audience both east and west, and it's just a really tough business to get through and to survive. But for me to tell stories, the ultimate goal, of course, is to make impact. Because I'm trained as a journalist. Like I chose the form of documentary because I believe that it's a transformative experience for audience that can really kind of motivate them to create changes, and that's ultimately why I'm trying to make films. But like with the kind of limited resources, particularly as a filmmaker from China, and the market that we have that's like not very promising and thriving, there was a moment in my life that I was doubting myself whether I'm choosing the right career. And then that was the moment that I started with a film called Please Remember Me. It's a film, a love story of my great uncle and my great aunt-in-law, and my great aunt-in-law has Alzheimer's. So the story is about how my great uncle spent 20 years as the only caregiver for her in the country, in the society that's very challenging to grow old. And so the story that the film that we made won a lot of awards internationally, but I realized at that time it's not satisfying for me anymore. So I started to initiate a campaign, a social media campaign of a documentary. That's actually the first documentary social impact campaign in China that we did. Awesome. And the first outreach screening we did was in this neighborhood committee with like 200 old people. They actually, in their lifetime, I know they have never seen a documentary film before. All they've seen is like television, kind of investigative documentaries that they actually don't really connect with as much as common people. So when we showed the film for an hour and a half, I was sitting in the back and I could see them chit-chatting throughout the film. I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna fail. We're failing this. Like they're not responding to the film. They're all talking, but I didn't realize they were actually talking about the film to each other. So after the film, we had like an hour and a half conversations. So the backstory is that for Alzheimer's patients in China, the literal translation for Alzheimer is old retards, which means there is a systematic discrimination against that community, that 80% of these patients never had the chance to even get diagnosed in a hospital because everyone was like so ashamed of taking them to the hospital, even family members. So because of the campaign, we intentionally changed the term of from old retards to dementia disease, right? And then and with the screenings, we rolled sort of like snowballed of like 500 screenings around the country, and in the end we created policy change. So that particular screening, that first screening, it gave me such validation as a filmmaker that there is meaning of our work. And so like the connection of the work that I do and then the impact that we can make for the world, for our society, even in the country that I grew up as a very oppressive in terms of what we wanted to say, we can still have a space that we created for ourselves to create changes. And that to me is a awakening moment. But then the last film I made called Hidden Letters, I realized, it's such a rewarding career that it just pushed me going in, and then it pushed me to grow in different ways. If the Please Remember Me helped me to realize the impact of my work, Hidden Letters, the film that I just directed, which was shortlisted for the Oscar, is a story about a 400 years old secret language that women created and shared among themselves. It's the only gender-based language in the world right now, and how the younger generation is using this language as their torch to deal with the patriarchal society still in China today. So that film, I felt like I'm pushing so much boundaries as a filmmaker myself, and I am saying to myself of every decision is based on how I can push myself out of my comfort zone, and how I can make decisions not based on fear. And that gave me so much power and strength as a storyteller that, from that film, I feel like I was so liberated and I have so much more freedom that I wanted to try and create different things and different forms. So I think that those are like two moments I can think of that really like kind of anchored and push me to grow in different directions. One is more of a macro kind of like a societal validation of why we do this, and the second one is really like helping me internal of myself of how this career can also help me grow. So I'm sure that there is going to be more and more episodes from now on that will have more and more moments. But I'm like, really, that's the beauty of the industry, and that's the beauty of the career that we're in, actually.
Agreed. I think for me, it's not so much a specific project, but it's more of a feeling that I get every time I see a child, particularly children, resonate with something that I've worked on. And the reason for that being is, goes back to the nostalgia of how I would have felt feeling, being represented on TV or through a platform or through a certain character. And so for me, there were lots of instances where I would see, I'd be on an airplane and I'd see a parent kind of take out their iPad and put on the show, and the child is like super excited watching whatever it is, and I just kind of sneak a peek and I notice that it's something that I've worked on, and that was just I would be above the moon. And other instances where I'd see where something's created into merchandising and it becomes a toy, or it becomes a school bag or whatever it is, and that in of itself, I try to stop parents and ask them and really have a conversation with them about why their kid really loves what they're holding, or what they're looking at, or watching that particular series. What is it that resonates with them? And hearing those stories constantly is what uplifts me and makes me feel like everything that I'm doing sort of has a purpose in a way. So I think that would be more of the angle as opposed to just one particular project. But yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I just sort of parlay off Nassma, certainly, your whole filmmaking experience is so filled with so many moments. I think from a audience perspective, and how that made me feel, with the documentary film that I mentioned, we screened in Cleveland, I remember, last year, and there was this big kind of gruff looking guy, probably in his 50s or 60s, almost kind of like a trucker kind of looking guy, and he was with his young daughter, and he was just in tears, like just full out tears after the film. And he came up to the two subjects of my film, the two young African boys that are in the film, the two stars, and he shook their hand. He was like, "Thank you so much for telling your story." And he's like, I've changed. Thank you so much for allowing me to understand what you guys go through. Because that part of Washington, D.C. is the highest crime rate currently in the United States. And a lot of stereotypes are given with people from that area and whatnot, and that film was part of just adding humanity to the people from that neighborhood, and that just really hit me hard to see something like that. I mean, you don't always see people's reactions. People leave the theater, people watch it on their own. You don't really know, but to witness a moment like that was so poignant. But I guess the one I want to actually throw it back to the first movie, one of the first movies I ever made in school, and it was a feature film, and it was called The Most Beautiful Thing. I was at University of Toronto, and I think like that experience showed me, and sort of a little bit what Violet said, there are experiences when you do something and you can kind of prove to yourself that you can do it, and you almost need those moments, right? I mean, you could probably, certainly Kumar, I know you with your feature, you have moments where like, I can't, like, this is stupid. This is not going to work. What am I doing? I'm not capable, and I just remember, I was 20 years old pushing a wheelchair full of camera gear from class to class because I didn't have a car, and I had to take the subway back to Scarborough, which is the east end of Toronto, with my gear. But I had class in between, and then the film club was only open certain hours, so it'd take this wheelchair full of gear with tripod and a camera, whatever, and go from class to class for like 3 hours, and and I'm parking my gear next to my seat in lecture hall, and taking notes in some random philosophy class or something. And I look back at those moments and I realize like those are really important character moments. And we finished that film, and did it land me a premiere at TIFF when I was 20 like I thought it would? No, but it certainly turned out pretty well, but it showed what you're capable of, and those moments are almost as important as just, you know, getting validation from a crowd or an audience or a buyer, just to understand that you yourself, you've proven to yourself that you can do something, that almost has more weight than anything.
Awesome, awesome. That's just so amazing. I think, I mean, all three of you, it shows how much you guys really care about the work that you do, the first thing. And more so than that, I think it's all of these small moments that have shaped you into who you are as a better person. I mean, realizing that your films are a tool for change, understanding that, you know, you can do things, and looking very closely at your audiences, seeing what they go through. I think these are all very, very important factors for any storyteller and any creator in that sense. And I'm certainly learning a lot from each and every single one of you. So we have a few more minutes left to go, and I thought of just pivoting to some fun questions before we end as well. But okay, so let's say I'm I'm like a 20-year-old, I'm like 15-year-old kid who wants to go into filmmaking, and I'm coming to the three of you and I'm asking you guys, what do I do? What are the mistakes I shouldn't make? What are some
Get a
of
real
the
job. Get a real job. Don't do it.
This is the best
Go into
answer.
engineering or, you know, something else, carpentry.
Yeah, what would you tell me? What would you tell a kid who is super interested in filmmaking and they come and see you? What would you tell them now?
Well, I mean, I get that question all the time, running, you know, Toronto Film School. And one of the first things I say is, you got to hustle. And this is not something, as Violet mentioned, you know, documentary filmmaking is not a super, you know, I don't know, it's not going to make you rich, put it that way. You really have to love what you do. I'm sure animation's the same way, Nassma, and just in general, filmmaking is not a very good business model, to be honest. Like, if you want assuredness, you know, it's not always the best profession. But I think most people, I would say, are led by passion, and that would be the first thing I think you need to ask yourself is, how bad do you want to do this? Is this something that you're really passionate about? Because when the chips are down and you're not making money, but you're still excited to get up every single morning to get that camera and to go shoot, that's the question I ask everybody is, if you were to do one thing for the rest of your life and to get that one thing, what is going to get you excited in the morning that you just will do every single day? And if it's not filmmaking, but you think well, you know, I might want to try it, you know, as a long-term thing, it might be challenging. So I always say, like, start with your gut, you know, what kind of passion do you have for this? And then if you are ready for it, you know, you gotta hustle.
Absolutely. I think being passionate is really, really important. I had a roundabout way of kind of going back to the origin of what I wanted to do. So I tried to satisfy that sort of immigrant parent mentality by going into something that was, you know, design, not really not fully creative, and where you had to hustle too hard. But, you know, you obviously still had to work really hard for it. And while I don't regret it one bit, you know, it gave me a lot of experience. I gained a lot of not just friendships, but also a lot of knowledge. I had a more sort of technical background going into it. And so I did gain a lot out of it. It's just that I think once I kind of went through that cycle, I still found my way back to what I initially wanted to do is writing and filmmaking through animation. And for me, that was sort of a very enlightening moment, I guess, is that, you know, even though I didn't feel like I wasted any time, but I do feel like it's very important to be authentic from the beginning and really sort of fight the fight and really be there for what you want to do. And I think, as to what, you know, Stephen said, you really have to have the passion for it and really know that this is something that you want to work towards. And while I had a roundabout way of finding that out myself, I think other people, you know, choose different paths, and I think there's a reason for all of that. But if you have the choice and you know that you're dedicated and you want to stick to it, I think that you should. I find a lot of people kind of go into the creative fields, and I've worked with a lot of students as well, who have wanted to intern or have wanted to kind of break into the industry, especially here in the Middle East. And I find that there might not be enough practical education when it comes to what they're getting into, because I think there's a lot of this understanding that, you know, oh, it's cool, I'm definitely going to win an award for my next film, or I'm definitely going to get somewhere in the next 5 years. And that might not be the case for a lot of people, and that's not to say they're not talented enough. That's not to say that they're not good enough. It's just the nature of the industry. And I think definitely where you're placed is also very important. So you really need to know what path you want to take, and whether you need to be a specific location, you need to be somewhere to do what you want to do. That's also a very important consideration, I think, because I think if I were entirely based out of the Middle East, I would have had a very different career trajectory than I did, because of where I was at the time that I chose to do so. So there are logical considerations as well. So I wouldn't say throw caution to the wind and just go about it. I think that you really need to sit down and think about it, and possibly even have a mentor that you can go back to and speak with, and have honest and open conversations with about what you want to achieve out of your career for the next 20 odd years. So yeah.
For me, I honestly, I look back, I feel so lucky and grateful that I actually do what I do. Like I constantly joke with my husband that we don't have midlife crisis. And I don't know, like, how many people can say that proudly, that we don't have midlife crisis, but I don't. And I think that, to me, it's so important that we chose this profession intentionally, and the reason that why we chose this. And I come down to tell myself that every day, if I can live by 3 things, I am okay. The 3 things is whether my work will have impact. Secondly, if I can stay creatively challenged. Third is whether I can be financially sustainable. All 3 things are important. And I do think that if you're giving all of yourself into this, it's going to be so rewarding to one's growth of one's life, to make film, to make especially documentary film. And I do believe money will follow. So that is what I believe. And I also teach at a university right now. And I always tell my students that start to think as an artist as soon as possible, because what is art? Art is an expression of imagination, right? It's an imagination, not just about the creative side, but also imagination of who you are and who you want to be, who you can become. And I think being in this world constantly force us and push us to reflect on how we're defined as a storyteller ourselves. And there are actually 3 layers of storytelling here. Every film that we work on, there's a story that we work on, right? Yeah. And then there's a life of the impact of the film that we work on. There's another storytelling that we're doing of how we can translate that film to actually make an impact of the world. And there's also a storytelling of us as artists, of the body of our work, and how that can create and contribute to the society when we stop working one day. So I feel these all 3 layers of storytelling really pushes me to really think about what kind of work I want to do. Who am I? How do I find my creative voice? And what does that creative voice means? And how does that voice evolve so that I can be a better version of myself? So I think that it's, even though like I don't have a 9-to-5 job, but I felt like these things pushes me so hard to move forward with my community. So and then the other advice I would say that, like, if you call yourself a filmmaker, I know that, it's hard sometimes to start. You wanted to start as a production assistant, you want to start as an intern or whatever, you wanted to be on other people's production. I mean, that's just all fine. But what defines you as a filmmaker is you make films yourself. So start to do that as soon as possible and be a filmmaker. Call yourself a filmmaker, and then start an idea and then start pushing yourself to make a film. And you will learn so much just by making your own film along the way. And I think that, I chose to be a producer for so long, and because I was so fearful that I'm not good enough to be a director. And I learned it the hard way that I should have just started doing it from day one, because that's the only thing that can get us out of being fearful, is by doing it. So I think that's the best thing that I can advise people is just start making films.
Awesome. This is truly amazing. If I had the time, I would love to like have like a specific 3-hour conversation with each and every single one of you. And it's very well thought out. And I love the fact that all three of you are coming from different backgrounds, coming from different experiences, but in your own way, you are using film as a tool for change. Whether it's through teaching students, whether it's through bringing your film to different communities, whether it's through impacting children. Film has that power. Film has that ability to change people. It has that ability to show people that hey, you can be so much more. And I think that's been the highlight for all of us. In many ways, that's what keeps us going, because we know that whatever we put out there is going to impact one person's life, and that's going to make a huge difference for us. And that sort of concludes our panel session very nicely today. Thank you guys so much for spending your time here. Please do, for all the audience who are watching, please do follow each and every single one of them on social media. Check out their shows, check out their movies, connect with them on LinkedIn. I think it makes a big difference to get to know more people in the industry. And thank you so much for making the time today. You guys have made, especially my day, very. I'm a very happy person, right? And I'm going to go out and talk about how amazing this panel was for the next like 10 hours. And I'm very sure all the students who are watching right now are feeling the same as well. So thank you so much. And for audiences, please do continue watching the Global Game Changers Summit. Take a screenshot of us, post it up on social media, tag each and every single one of us there. And, we'll be seeing you at the next presentation, the next panel sessions. Thank you guys so much. This is signing off. See you guys next time.